last year, we have this clicking going on, so we knew something was going to go wrong, so now we know. What I'd like to do today is talk to you a little bit about the problem we're facing in the country, about eating and then moving, and give you some recommendations for quality and a few cautions sort of to pass on. So everybody knows the problem. We're paying a lot of money. We're not getting much for our money in this country. We're 37th out of 191 countries in the World Health Organization. We are first in spending, but we're 36th in life expectancy, 39th in infant mortality, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What's happened is we've had a large increase in chronic disease, so 75% of the money is going to treat chronic diseases. So we're going to focus on that today. And it's not just the money we're spending in our health insurance, it's the money that's coming out of your pocket in co-pays and supplements and things like that. I'd like to start out with a couple definitions because how you define terms often have a lot to say with how you think about things. Primary prevention is when you don't have a disease and you do something so you don't get the disease. So let's say you have a blood sugar of 95, which is now considered normal by the medical profession, and you do something to lower it to 85. That's primary prevention. You're less likely to be diabetic. Secondary prevention is you have type 2 diabetes and you do something so your sugars become normal, you're on no medication for it, so that's secondary prevention. Tertiary prevention is where you have diabetes, you do stuff, and you're still on medications or you're undergoing procedures. People often talk about drugs as either primary or secondary preventive agents. They aren't really. They're all tertiary. And doctors get trapped into thinking beta blockers are primary prevention for heart disease, or the statins, which they take for cholesterol, are primary preventions for heart disease. So it's really important to know the distinction. Now, medicine could have emphasized either of these in combination or alone, but we elected to go off and charge off into tertiary prevention, so that now, at this point, this is actually 2008 data, it's worse now, 25% of the population are on some chronic medication. And over age 65, 25% of people are on 5 or more medications. And the more contact you have with physicians, the more likely. So we charged off in medications. That's the medical end of people, like family medicine docs and internists. We write a lot of prescriptions. The surgeons have been right behind us, however. Here's one of the bizarro cartoons I like to use. Welcome to Texas, come for the barbecue, stay for the angioplasty. We killed 27,000 people in 2008 doing angioplasties and bypass surgery and spent over $100 billion doing it. Gastric bypass is a growing industry with no good long-term evaluations, and even things like inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's and ulcerative colitis is often helped by a plant-based diet, and the surgeries can be avoided. Medical care is hazardous to your health. This is from the 1999 and 2000 Institute of Medicine Crossing the Quality Chasm into Errors Human reports. And it looks like we have a very safe anesthesia area in medicine. If you get put to sleep, you can get woken up and you can probably move your fingers and toes and do very well. They've done a great job in quality, but the rest of us are somewhere down around bungee jumping and mountain climbing for actual safety. So we have a long way to go. So let's talk about eating and disease. You know, you can't avoid death. We all have the same destination, but these are the leading causes of death as of a couple years ago, and Alzheimer's has sort of come up to 8 now. But we're going to talk about most of these today. We're not going to have time to delve into cancer. 70% of those seem to be able to be avoided. So let's talk about type 2 diabetes. I have the good fortune of working for John McDougall in the McDougall Whole Foods program. And John's a friend and a mentor, and his 10-day program, which has been going on for about 10 years now, actually more like 12, John Mackey and Whole Foods actually had him skinny it down to 8 days. So this is a residential program where people come and live for 8 days. Whole Foods employees actually are flown in, and they live there. That's for your video. Got it. Okay, now I'm on track. So I see patients, and we make recommendations on day one. Usually my job is to take them off the blood pressure medicine as well as so my job is to take people off their blood pressure medicine and their diabetic medicine on day one, or if they're type 1, to modify it, because when they start eating a low-fat, non-oil, plant-based diet, they don't need those things, and their blood pressures get better and their sugars get better, and they will actually go too low. So in the week, they also get 33 hours of lectures, and they actually get they interact with other team members, are given exercise. And I'd like you to hear from one of our patients here. So let's see how this is going to work. How do you think we ought to do this, Jeff? You ought to just crank up the volume? Okay, let's see how this works. I've got two speakers up here, but they don't really fit too well here, so I'll hold one of them up.
I came to McDougall Immersion in March of this year. When I got here, I type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, really high cholesterol, was on 2 different diabetes medications, Lipitor for my cholesterol, and lisinopril for high blood pressure. I lost a couple pounds while I was here, and in the last 7 months or so since, I've lost about 62 pounds. Completely reversed the diabetes. My waking blood sugars are generally around 75, 80 every day. I stopped taking measurements after 3 months of those readings. My life's completely changed. I have tons of energy. I feel fantastic. I can finally beat my 6-year-old in a race, which is a nice thing.
So Ben was one of my patients, and you can imagine this is a very rewarding way to practice medicine. The reason Ben was successful is he understood, and we led to understood that he was led to understand that diabetes is a sugar processing problem, but it's caused by the fats in the diet. That's what the best science shows. So the fats interfere with the insulin, which is a hormone that brings the glucose into the cell, and it turns off the genes that run the mitochondria that burn the sugar. Once you understand that belief and you change your behavior in line with it, your diabetes typically gets better. People throw the term sugar around loosely. I want to get a little bit into it because there's all this carbophobia going on. There are simple sugars like glucose and fructose, sucrose, which is table sugar, which is 1 molecule of each, lactose, which is in milk. We won't talk much about that. And then complex carbohydrates, which are long chains of glucose. They're starches, and they're set up so you can actually digest them, and the glucose molecules come into your body. And fiber, which we can't digest in our upper tract, where the glucoses are held together, but they're rotated a little bit, so they can't be digested by us, but the bacteria in our gut can digest them. Okay? Into 2, 3, and 4 car fragment short-chain fatty acids, which are beneficial to us. I hate to subject you to a little biochemistry, but I'm a chemical engineer, so I get away, and I'm the speaker, so I get away with it. Fructose is a ketone, and glucose is an aldehyde. They're very similar chemically. However, your body treats them very differently, and it's important to understand the distinction. Glucose is your primary fuel. It is the fuel that is burned by every cell in your body. It's like your gasoline for your car. It stimulates insulin release so the glucose can get into the cells. It suppresses your appetite. On a sweetness scale, it's 73. Fructose is an entirely different animal as far as your body's concerned. It's only burned by your liver. And it's converted into uric acid, which gives you a propensity to gout, raises your blood pressure, cholesterol, inflammatory aldehydes, so that fructose is probably the leading source of cirrhosis in the country today, more than alcoholism. And it doesn't suppress your appetite, and it's, as you can see, much sweeter than glucose. So you can understand, here's a substance that is very sweet that doesn't suppress your appetite. It's not surprising you're finding it in a lot of your food substances. Now, you've heard about high fructose corn syrup. Actually, table sugar is 50-50. High fructose corn syrup, even though there's a 90-10, most of it's 60-40. So they don't have to add a lot of fructose to make it a lot sweeter. And the issue is you can handle fructose because your body's, it's a natural substance. In fruits, we have sucrose, glucose, and fructose, plus the phytochemicals and fiber. So fruits are good, but what we do at the McDougall program is we tend to limit people to about 4 or 5 a day. Occasionally we'll get people who we really need to get their cholesterols down or their triglycerides are high, and those people we have to really pull off fruits. I had one guy who came in with a triglyceride of 150, and at the end of the week we rechecked their blood work, and he had actually increased his triglycerides to over 500. And he was just eating nothing but fruit. So we had to sort of ratchet him back a little bit. But it's not that fructose is bad. It just has to be used with caution. And here again, basically, we're starchivores. Starches are potatoes, grains, and beans. This is what it looks like, a starch molecule looks like. Our adaptation from the great apes, and this is Nathaniel Domini's work, is we have about 4 times the amount of amylase genes, so we produce more amylase. Amylase is the enzyme that breaks up the starches. Catherine Milton's work out of Berkeley, looking at apes, we have about 40% more volume in our small intestine, so we're set up to absorb the glucose more. So basically, we are starchivores. You eat stuff out of the ground like potatoes and sweet potatoes. You can just exist on that. You don't need anything else except for B12, and you heard about that in the previous lecture. But if you start using starches above ground like rices and corn and stuff like that, you need a sprig of broccoli and maybe a little bit of a citrus to get the vitamin A and vitamin C where you're deficient in those. But other than that, you can live on this sort of thing. So from a diabetic standpoint, we're just looking at diabetes here. Which foods would you eliminate? Here are foods, you can see the high-fat content of most animal foods on the left. Non-fat milk's down at 2%. And you can see the percent fat in the plant world over here on the right. Now, from a diabetic standpoint, you'd be better off drinking non-fat milk and getting rid of these things on the top of the letter. Maybe even more than broccoli. Now, there are a lot of reasons. For other reasons, you might not want to do that, and we'll get into those later, but for instance, just from lowering the fats intake in your diet, this gives you the idea. And when we give information to our patients at the McDougall Whole Food Program, we get down to that level of detail. When I started doing plant-based prescribing with Kaiser in the last 3 years of my practice and started having success with my patients, my colleagues started to ask me to give talks to them, CME talks, continuing medical education talks. I'm doing one down here at a Sutter Hospital on Tuesday. And I started looking around the literature, and this was 2006, and I came across this interesting study. This is a study of 21 patients that had type 2 diabetes for 12 years and had painful neuropathy in the distal part of their legs for actually, on average, 3.5 years. They put them in a residential program, and 17 had complete relief in 16 days. Now, these are people I was prescribing pills to, like Tegretol and Elavil, to try and control the symptoms, but I had never given them this option. I'm sitting here, why am I not aware of this? Well, your physicians aren't aware of these things because there's so much of this literature out there for them to keep up with. I'm on the board of nutritionfacts.org. I work with Michael Greger, who you may have had the opportunity and the delight to hear speak before. And he reads 12,000 articles a year just in human nutrition. So there's no way your regular physician working in an office as busy as they are, dealing with the complexities that they're dealing with, or physicians, nurse practitioners, or anybody can keep up with the literature. That's why I don't try. I run around after people, John McDougall and Michael Greger, and let them read it all, and they just sort of distill it down. I'm sort of like a bottom feeder from that standpoint. But if you'll notice over here, in addition to relief of their symptoms, they had lost weight, their triglycerides, cholesterols were down, 80% of them were off their blood pressure medicine, they had lowered their pressures, and at the end of 4 years, 71% were still on the program. Actually, it was higher than that because they counted as one of the people who was off the diet somebody who had died, so I don't think that's quite fair. So the take-home message for diabetes is that chronic diseases can often be prevented, they can often be reversed or stabilized, and even some of the complications that we don't think of as being reversed can be reversed. But the hidden message there is start earlier. Don't wait to get the complications and try and reverse them at that point. It's a lot better to prevent things primarily than it is secondarily. So let's talk about arterial disease. Very common. This is a P-Day study which was published in '99. If you're on a standard American diet by age 15 or 19, you have lesions in your aorta and your right coronary, and by 30 or 34, you can see they've just gotten a lot worse. And what this leads to, arterial disease, as you might imagine, you've got 75,000 miles of arteries and veins in your body. Your body actually needs those things to be open and functioning, and if they aren't, you get all sorts of problems. You've heard about these on the left, probably. The ones on the right are a little bit, maybe you haven't heard of. The narrow discs, when you do a back x-ray, people get narrow discs. Well, the nutrition from the narrow discs comes from arteries that come off the back of the aorta, which is the big artery in the body. And if those things get plugged up, the the nutrition to the vertebral bodies isn't as good, and then what's left over after the vertebral bodies are finished with it gets diffused to the disc spaces. So I used to tell patients this was wear and tear, so I came across the Swedish studies that actually showed that wasn't the case. Of course, courtesy of Bob Dole in that one election we had a while ago, everybody knows about male sexual dysfunction, but females have sexual dysfunction in their 40s and 50s connected with relative and correlated with their cholesterol levels. So it's both male and females. So to understand arterial disease, you have to understand cholesterol, which gets into the walls that actually causes the inflammation, the nitrous oxide system, so that laughing gas your dentist may have exposed you to, which doesn't exist for very long but is able to dilate the arteries, and a little bit about omega-3s. This is a case study from courtesy of Caldwell Esselstyn. You may have heard about him if you've heard Caldwell speak. This is a 44-year-old surgeon who had no family history of coronary artery disease, wasn't overweight, was a non-smoker, no diabetes or high blood pressure. He was operated, and he exercised, and he was operated. He had pretty good cholesterols, but he had chest pain, and when they studied him, they found blockage in his distal left anterior descending artery. Now, this wasn't accessible to bypass because it was too small down here to jump to, and if they tried to put a stent in it, it probably would have killed him. So he went to Dr. Esselstyn, and he put him on his diet. And then he got better with his symptoms, and he went away. And then a couple of years later, 2.5 years later, he developed some chest pain, even though all his numbers looked better. So they wanted to know and see what happened to his artery, and they restudied him, and it was now open. So Esselstyn and Ornish have shown that over a year, 2-year, 3-year time frame, you can actually reverse these blockages. The interesting thing is Dr. Esselstyn just published a paper in the Journal of Family Medicine or Journal of Family Practice in July, which followed 192 patients for 3.5 years, and they maintained his diet. They've had heart attacks or they were shown to have coronary disease. Only less than 1% of them had an event every year on average. The best we can do with medicine and surgery is 1 out of 5 people having an event, or 20%. So he took a 20% as best practice and dropped it down to 0.6%, which is remarkable. The nitrous oxide system, you get an amino acid in your diet, you get an enzyme that turns it into nitrous oxide. This opens up your arteries, makes them healthier with the blood flow, blocks platelet aggregation so you're less likely to clot, blocks the inflammation which causes the inflammation on the lining of the artery, which leads to the heart attacks, and also blocks smooth muscle cell proliferation. And when we put people on a plant-based diet, the nitrous oxide system improves actually within a week or two. So here's before and after. You can see the increased blood flow. This is a nuclear medicine scan. Here's before and after. This is just after 3 weeks of nutritional therapy. So from a blood pressure standpoint, when I went plant-based 7 years ago, I was running about 125 over 85. Now I'm down to about 105 over 60 or 65. I'm healthier now, but it didn't all happen at once. It's sort of probably, I didn't follow it every day or every week when I first went, but it probably dropped down pretty suddenly and then sort of gradually got better over time. And the studies actually show that people who have been on a plant-based diet for about 20 years have about a 20 less lower systolic and about 10 lower diastolic blood pressure. And what you have to remember, even at my pressures, I'm likely to have a stroke, but I'm a lot less likely to have a stroke or a heart attack than I was at 125 over 85. So it's a matter of risk. We now know a little bit. We'll skip over this because of all the sound stuff. I want to get through to the end. But we now understand why all the things like high blood sugar and smoking and all the other risk factors, it interferes with an enzyme which is designed to protect your nitrous oxide system. So we're starting to understand this at a biochemical level, but the take-home message is still the same. I knew we would find it something that sunlight did besides make vitamin D before I died. I was looking forward to it. It turns out that your skin, your dermis, stores nitrates, nitrites, and nitrososols, and when you get exposed to sun, not only does it create vitamin D, but it also liberates nitrous oxide in your system to make your arteries work better. So if your vitamin D levels are low, the treatment is sun exposure, not vitamin D pills. And we could have a long discussion about what constitutes adequate vitamin D levels and things like that, but the treatment for vitamin D deficiency is sun exposure. More recently, I haven't told people about this yet, but this is, you get choline and carnitine from animal products primarily, and it gets converted and absorbed into by your gut flora into TMA, which then gets converted in the liver to something called TMAO, which is trimethylamine oxidase, which actually lines your arteries and has been shown to be very concentrated in cancer cells and in the artery linings, but also the joint linings. And we'll hear a little bit about that in a minute, more about that. We know about the omega-3s and omega-6. It's always nice to speak to an audience like this who's so well informed about this stuff. But remember that the omega-3s and the omega-6s are the only fatty acids you really need. You can get adequate in plants. They go through the same enzymes, so they compete. So if you get a lot of this, you're going to get a lot more of the inflammatory clotting. Whereas if you have more of this relative to this, you're going to have more of the anti-inflammatory, anti-clotting. When we give people aspirin to block clots and stuff, this is where it works over here below the arachidonic acid. We know historically that the ratio of those two substances were about 1 or 2 to 1. Meat eaters in this country run about 7 to 1, lacto-vegetarians about 10 to 1, and vegans can run 15 to 1 if they're not careful, because the vegans get a lot of it from the vegetable oils. So that's why we, especially corn oil. So the best sources of omega-3 are flaxseed, green leafy vegetables, and walnuts. And actually you only need about half a teaspoon of flaxseed a day, ground flaxseed, to get the omega-3s you need. High blood pressure. So I worked for John McDougall, and they decided, EarthSave, which is John Robbins' organization, decided to do a program at the Sacramento Food Bank. And they called John up, and they asked him if he'd come up and see the patients, and he said, no, get Forrester to do it, because he's in Sacramento. He'll do it for nothing anyway. So they got me into it. Very rewarding. Here again, it's a McDougall-type program where you have a kickoff weekend. I follow the participants, which I had 20 of them over a 2-month period, actually. There are observers who come who I don't take care of but can listen to all the educational for the whole weekend plus the twice-weekly event. We gave them food. They had food coaches. We provide the clinical care. It was actually a collaboration of EarthSave, the Sacramento Food Bank, and Whole Foods, who were gracious enough to donate a lot of the food. So I want you to hear from one of the people from that.
I started having high blood pressure when I was in my 40s. And since then, it was always high, but as I've gotten older, it was getting higher. And so my doctors were monitoring me. And I had been on that blood pressure medicine for over 22 years. This program done something for me that the medical industry couldn't do for me. This program done something for me in 4 days. 4 days, I was off of my blood pressure medicine. You know, when I started it, and 4 days, we started April the 8th. April the 12th was my doctor's appointment. And I went in there, and she took my blood pressure, because it had been running like 160 or 104, and it was going up, and they had upped my medication. And then when I started this vegan program, it went down, it was 123 over 78. And she says, oh, I think that the medicine that the doctor gave you is working. I go like, no. It's the food. And it really was the food, you know. I mean, I've been searching for a long time. I spent a lot of money at the health store. I really did. Trying to find out what was good for me. I hadn't had pork in like 38 years, but I'm still eating chicken and turkey and fish. And I wasn't doing too well. I was spending all this money on noni juice. I was spending money on spirulina, my calcium pills, all this money I was spending. And all I need to know was that I need to eat this plant-based, strong, definitely no diet. It was just so simple. And I'm going like, wow, I didn't have that one puzzle that was missing. And this is it. You know, I don't see myself going back to ever eating the way that I was eating because of the fact that I'm medicine free right now. And I'm loving it. I'm loving it. I get up in the mornings and I can just leave my house. I don't have to worry about, oh, did I take that blood pressure medicine? No. I'm feeling good right now. I'm feeling really good.
She also had borderline cholesterols, and they dropped about 40 points. Ben, who you heard from, dropped his cholesterol 60 points. His reflux went away. Ollie lost about 9 pounds in a 2-month period. All these people are feeling great. And this is consistent with the literature. We know that but when you go on this sort of a diet, your sodium intake goes down, that helps, but you also increase your potassium, your magnesium, your antioxidants, your soys, and your nitrates from the plants, We don't know which one of those things does the best. We haven't got a clue. All we know is it works. And it's consistent. We talked about the time frames a little bit. So the key beliefs around our arterial system is it's about the inflammation on the artery, the linings of the arteries. That's the nitrous oxide. The blockages, it's reversible, early is better, and it's a systemic disease, so it affects a lot of things. You need your arteries in good shape. Let's talk a little bit about disability. Everybody's got the same destination in the room, in case you haven't got that memo, okay? And disability, the quality of life is big, and every one of these things on the list, we don't have time to talk about all of them today, are related to a plant-based diet or can be improved. Mental and emotional problems seem to be better. We've put an awful lot of people on psychiatric medicine in this country. It's very easy to get people on those medications. It's very difficult to get them off. Most of the literature that I've read shows that after about 4 to 6 weeks, any longer on a medicine like that is dangerous to your health, and it takes a lot of effort by a physician who's overseeing you and family, friends around you to very slowly get you off that medicine. For those of you in the room who've ever gone through withdrawal from any of the psychiatric medicines, you probably know what I'm talking about. So we'll hit a few of these today. So let's talk about osteoarthritis. It's a little different than the autoimmune arthritises. I want you to hear, we did a second Meals for Health program at the Progressive Missionary Baptist Church down in Berkeley. That's just wrapping up after a year. So I want you to hear from one of our younger participants, an 81-year-old lady.
Thanks to Esther, because when she first comes to me to this, I said, ooh. I didn't hardly want to be bothered with it. And you know, she would always give me little notes and things and telling me about this and that. I'm not thinking about Esther. I love meat, and I'm going to eat meat. Do you know I haven't had a piece of meat in 30 days? And I was around some barbecue about a week ago, and I thought, how in the world am I going to be able to be around this barbecue and potato salad? Do you know I ignored it? And here I am. And another thing, I'm off most of my medication, not all of it. And I used to couldn't go to bed unless I had to have some pain pills. I haven't had a pain pill. My knee haven't hurt me. I feel much better. And I thank God for this program.
It's not unusual for us when we're taking care of people in an immersion setting like the McDougall for them to come on their third or fourth day when they come in and see us and say, I don't have those aches in my joints anymore. And more than likely, that's due to the fact that that TMAO has been cleared out of the system, because that's consistent with the half-life of that stuff being cleared out of your body. The other thing is osteoarthritis is a little different because you need a good blood supply to actually prevent and reverse and fix all the problems you get from daily wear and tear on your joints. So osteoarthritis really probably isn't an autoimmune disorder. It's probably just natural wear and tear. But when you have when you're eating correctly and you have a good blood flow situation, you're able to repair that stuff and you don't get as many aches and pains. She also lost 9 pounds, stopped her blood pressure medicines, dropped her her fasting blood sugar down, lowered her LDL. Her reflux was better, her acid reflux, her fatigue was better, her joint pain was 90% better. So once you start eating correctly, your body gets better across a wide range of areas. Here's the sialic acid we talked about. It's a little bit complicated about how it gets into your body. But the bottom line is every animal makes it except us. We lost a gene to make it, and because of that, we view it as a foreign substance. So let's talk about hearing. You know, in medicine, we have a term called presbycusis. Some of you may be accused of having that disease. It means old age hearing loss. We know it's associated with noise exposure, but they went into the Maybam tribe down in Sudan back in the late 1950s and found that their hearing actually, they wanted to find some tribe somewhere that had no noise exposure. They can only have access to these people about 3 months out of the year when the East Nile's not flooded. And they found they really didn't lose their hearing over time. And they're on almost a pure plant-based diet. And they've done studies to show that the loss of hearing as we get older is related to cholesterol, saturated fat, and noise exposure. And there are some things like in the plants and magnesium that are associated with it being, preventing your hearing loss from happening. So things in medicine that we think are age-related are not necessarily age-related. They did an interesting study in Finland where they took about 150 patients in one mental hospital and compared it with another one, and they put them on a low saturated fat diet, and the hearing in that hospital got better over 5 years. They didn't reverse the situation, and the hearing in the second hospital got better, and the first hospital got worse again on the diet. So hearing loss is associated with what you eat. Respiratory problems, you can actually, there's a plant-based study that showed that the chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and emphysema actually doesn't go down as fast, or the lung function doesn't go down as fast when you're on a plant-based diet. But one of the bigger things we see in medicine is asthma, which of course is associated with dairy. And I want you to hear from another one of our patients in the First Meals for Health program in Sacramento.
I want to tell you guys, I'm not a Meals for Health survivor, I'm a Meals for Health survivor. I got off 8 medications in the first month of my program. I was a pre-diabetic, I was on high blood pressure pills, anxiety pills, asthma pills. You could name it, I was taking it, and I don't take any of those medications anymore at all. In 2 months' time, I lost 31 pounds, and I just want to say, this is my program for life, and I want to thank everybody for changing my life for me. That's all I got to say.
Vision, of course, losing vision is a big source of disability in this country. Typically, it can be caused by diabetic retinopathy, macular degeneration, which is associated with improved on a plant-based diet, glaucoma, which is associated with these anti-nutrients making it better, cataracts, which are associated with smoking, radiation, and animal products, and old age loss, which we talked about before. These are two of the other factors that are associated with that. This is an example of a patient. This was published in 1959. This gentleman here had been 18 history of diabetes, and you can see all these little white spots and dark spots here. That's a sign of diabetic retinopathy. And after 26 months on a plant-based diet, he had pretty normal retina, and his vision had improved. Here again, you don't want to wait till this happens so you can try and go over here because it doesn't always work. But the elephant in the room is Alzheimer's or dementia. We're going to touch on that real quickly. For those of you who want to read more, you can read Neil Barnard's book called Power Foods for the Brain. Alzheimer's accounts for about 60 or 75% of dementia. Vascular, multiple little strokes account for about 10 to 15%. This is associated with strokes. That's helped. We've already talked about arterial disease and blood pressure. Mixed is this. Parkinson's accounts for a small amount. Of course, Parkinson's is related to dairy and insecticide exposure, but we don't have time to get into some of the neurological conditions. These seem to make Alzheimer's disease the likelihood of getting it worse. Genetic has a component. Saturated fat, cholesterol, omega-6s, and drugs. You see anything somewhere on that list that we've been talking to? It looks like Alzheimer's disease is going to be nutritional disease with few metals thrown in. Metals being copper, iron, zinc, and aluminum at this point. Okay? You want to minimize your exposure to these. Of course, it's hard to deal with your copper pipes and can't sort of those. But people take a lot of this stuff in multiple vitamins. They're just taking it thinking it's helping them. You want to not cook in iron skillets, aluminum skillets. Actually, leading source of aluminum in your diet is processed cheese across the board. They add aluminum to cheese to make it more meltable and sliceable. Things that reduce the risk of Alzheimer's are these vitamins, probably not taken as isolated nutrients: mental exercise, sleep, and omega-3s. And there's a reference. And actually, all these books that I'm talking about are on my website. I have a card up here in front you can pick up. It's a non-commercial website. I don't have any books yet. I've written a couple articles which would actually cure you of your insomnia because they're in the Physician's Executive Journal. But I don't have any books or DVDs to sell. But I do have a list on my website of what I find is useful helping people, and Dr. Barnard's book is one of them. So let's talk about the autoimmune disorders. There are about 125 of them. Here's another patient. This is from our second Meals for Health program.
Anyone who had anything at all to do with this, including our coach, who did reach out to me at least a lot. I just say thank you. I never thought after I got diagnosed with lupus, which caused me to go into kidney failure, that I would ever feel normal. Ever, honestly. Waking up tired every day, in pain every day, just not having your hair come out, and I came out of the hospital with 26 pills a day and a shot that I gave myself in my belly, and I never thought that my life would be different. My medications would change, but pretty much the fatigue and just feeling so less than myself just kind of remained the same. The very first weekend, with the exception of the horrendous gas that I had, that very first weekend, that Friday, that Saturday, that Sunday, that Monday morning, I woke up by myself at 5:30. I woke up without pain, and I noticed it, because when you have lupus, you notice things like that. I sat up in my bed, and Monday is an off day for me. I got a cup of coffee, because Jeff said he would not give us a hard time about the 1 cup of coffee. So I got the coffee, I went out on the deck, outside, and I just sat there, and I cried, because I just was like, I cannot believe I just got up by myself, and I wanted to get up, and I don't have any pain. And so it's been like that for me. My energy level is, everybody noticed my energy level, especially my coworkers, because they were like, I don't know if we can handle you going back to the way you were. My attention, my focus, I'm off 2 of my medications, and I have secretly tapered down some of my other ones. But Dr. Forrester said to wait for my kidney doctor, my rheumatologist, to do the other stuff. But I am just encouraged, because I know that I'm going to come off the remainder of that medication. I am, without to be graphic, peeing all by myself without the use of some of the medications that I took myself off of. So I just feel very grateful, and overwhelmed, because I really didn't, I knew I would feel better, but I didn't believe I could feel this much better in such a short amount of time. It is just miraculous. So I just thank God. I thank this program. The funding for this, I could not have done this without the assistance of the food, Dr. Forrester. I could not have afforded to do this. So this was just an awesome blessing.
There are lots of autoimmune disorders. There's actually about 130 of them. Some of you may have thyroid disease. We think that's probably due to your exposure to animal thyroid, eating animal thyroid earlier in your life. Somebody said, well, where would you get animal thyroid? Try sausages and hot dogs. Type 1 diabetes associated with milk and dairy intake. I have no idea why the pediatricians at age 2 start telling you can start feeding kids dairy milk at age 2 when it wasn't okay for them before that. We talked about some of the Crohn's disease. Basically, the mechanisms: exposure to animal proteins, leaky gut due to animal fat, and endotoxins, and plant triggers. The thing with the autoimmune disorders is there are some people whose autoimmune disorders are also triggered by plants. So the first thing you want to do is go on a plant-based diet, and then if you still have problems, you have to tweak that a little bit. Talk about weight loss. We'll sort of go through this one a little quickly just so we can get through the bottom line at the end. Here's another patient.
I was healthy on paper, and I thought, I was living my life, but I wasn't. I thought I knew how to eat healthy. I had the same doctor my entire adult life. I've been a member of Kaiser since 1976. I knew what it was to eat healthy. Oh, eat this, don't eat that, eat this, don't eat that, cut your calories, da-da-da-da-da. It didn't work. I had IBS every day, multiple times a day, for my daughter's entire life. 3 days after changing what I eat, I got had IBS. And that's been almost 3 months now. I don't have migraines anymore. I have fibromyalgia, but I'm almost not going to claim that anymore because I feel so much healthier. I have so much more energy. I just am so excited. I've lost over 40 pounds in 2.5 months. I thought that I knew what it was to be healthy. I thought I was stuck in the life that I had, having fibromyalgia and just existing. I am so grateful to everyone here that started this program, because I have a life now. I can live and enjoy my life and spend time with my kids and not just sleep all day long. And I never would have been able to experience any of that if it wasn't for Earth Phase and Hope for Health.
One of my pet peeves is BMI. People in this room probably know what your BMI is if you've been to a physician recently. Ansel Keys, who popularized it, was actually invented by this gentleman back, a Belgian mathematician, back in 1832. His quote, Ansel Keys, who's a population biologist, unfortunately died a couple years ago, should not be used for individuals. And actually, it misses over 50% of adult obesity and misclassifies a large number of men and women as being obese when they're not. All you have to do when you get out of the shower and you don't have any clothes is go over to the mirror and look at the mirror. And you can tell whether you're a little over fat or not, okay? It's pretty obvious, okay? When I went plant-based, I was about 198. I'm wrestling around 175 now. I absolutely know what I have to do to get down to 170. But there are some barriers in my way right now. We'll talk about calorie density. We'll go through this pretty quick so we can get to the end. The technical difficulties slowed me up a little bit at the beginning. Most of you have heard about, if you've heard Jeff Novick, it's all about calorie density or how many calories per pound. These are your food groups. If you eat down here, you're going to lose weight. You start moving up into here, you're going to gain weight. Because you're going to eat about 3 or 4 pounds of food a day. Leading source of calorie intake for women in this country since 1980 is salad oils. A lot of the people who feel better on gluten-free, they're getting away from this and they're moving down into this area here, so they're starting to lose weight and feel better, but it has nothing to do with their gluten-free. I mean, it's true that 1 in 130 people have celiac disease, and maybe about another 3 or 4 out of that 130 are going to have a sensitivity to wheat. But it's not the gluten that's the problem. Once you understand this sort of thing, you can understand where you're going. Nuts are 2,800 calories per pound. About an ounce of nuts are good for people, and if you're active, you can eat 2 ounces. But you start eating a lot more than that, you're liable to start putting it over your belt line. These are the foods. There's some good news. You can see that if you take an apple and dry it out, you can actually get to a much higher calorie density. Pasta at its dry state is pretty calorie dense, but when you cook it in water, it's actually pretty good. So pasta and the carbohydrates, the complex carbs like potatoes and beans, they're great foods for you. You start getting into sugars down here at 1,800 and cheeses and chips and almonds, and you start getting into more calorie density. Casein in cheese and dairy is actually metabolized to, here's, would you like congealed bovine mammary secretions with that? That's why they created the word cheese. Casein's metabolized to 8 different casomorphins in your gut and absorbed. It's actually an addicting substance. Okay, whereas when you eat meat and sugar, they actually release products in your brain, so they're not actually addicting, but they sort of have an addiction by a different path. Of course, we get all sorts of messages. Milk does the body good, and it drives us in certain ways. They have new genetically improved cows because they're kept pregnant about 305 days out of the year, so they have a naturally high estrogen in the milk. So if you take prepubescent children, women and girls and boys, and you give them 2 glasses of milk, they're going to have 3 times the amount of estrogen in their body. Men who take milk as a recovery drink, it's an interesting approach to recovery. After 1 to 2 hours, they have lower testosterone and higher estrogen. Like I mentioned, aluminum is in cheese. Carcinogens, dioxin is the most carcinogenic substance known to man. Less than 120 femtograms, or a quadrillionth of a gram, is considered a safe level. Haagen-Dazs ice cream, 49,000 a scoop. Pizza Hut pizza, 105. Half-life, 6 to 7 years. Comes from burning plastics, gets in the environment, gets on the grass. Even grass-fed cows will have it. Not as much as the concentrated animal feed operation cows, but still, it's a problem. So if you can change our beliefs, here's some guy who didn't listen to his wife. I warned you about the hormones and all that meat and dairy you were eating. He's got a little tail going on here. He's got a little udder forming there. I'll be married 44 years next month. I've learned to listen to my wife. So food is good for us, to a food isn't good, to a food is harmful, to it's harmful, addictive, and contained. So when you walk into the food store, you actually change your belief systems. It changes your behavior. The only diet that works is the ad libitum diet. This is a study where they took 22 adults for 21 days in Hawaii. They were on the standard American diet. They switched them to a high carbohydrate, complex carbohydrate, more traditional way. They were told to eat till they were no longer hungry. Their calorie intake went from 2,600 to 1,600 calories per day, and they were full just by eating better. They had all the other improvements that we've talked about. So that's the only diet that works. The ad libitum diet, eat when you're hungry, eat the right foods. Say what you would like about eating children, it adheres to the Atkins diet. Low-calorie diets don't work, 1% success out of the end of a year. High-protein diets work because protein's actually a poison in some respects. We'll talk about that in a minute, but it suppresses your appetite. So the ad libitum is the way to go. We now, as complicated as the biochemistry gets, it keeps getting more complicated. We know that fat cells secrete over 200 substances that affect other parts of the body. The reason sugar is a problem is because it can lead to fat gain. Remember, it was 1,800 calories per pound. Glucose has never been shown to be inflammatory in your body. The fructose maybe. We talked about that. Childhood obesity is an adult problem. Here's the parents. Finish your Pepsi and Cheetos or don't get dessert. So, set a good example. Jeff and Sid talked about that, leading the way by actually setting a good example. Let's talk about moving and fitness a little bit. Fitness is... you gotta love cats. I love cats, you know. Like dogs too, like all animals. But they're not very good in aerobic, but they've got strength, flexibility, balance, and stability. They can sure relax well. They also sleep 80% of the time. Good work if you can get it. Aerobic versus progressive resistant training, it improves your outlook and your quality of your perceived quality. Both of them will improve your hemoglobin A1Cs. The aerobic running and things like that will actually improve your blood pressure better. They'll both lower your body fat. The reason exercise works for fat loss is because it actually decreases your leptin hormone, or actually it increases your leptin, which reduces your appetite and boosts your metabolism. The nice thing that Jeff Novick did better than anybody, and Jeff's DVD on calorie density I highly recommend, is he tied exercise to the levels of calorie density. This is what I needed when I was practicing at Kaiser Permanente, because people would come in with arthritis in their knees. They'd be overweight. They'd say, my orthopedic doctor won't replace my knees unless I lose weight, but I can't lose weight because I can't exercise. You can lose weight on a couch with a remote if you get your calorie density down. I don't advocate that. Exercise is healthy, probably as much as you can do a good walking program, but it can be done. And we're now finding out just more recently that the muscle functions as a gland. Muscle actually secretes over 140 peptides that talk to other organs in the body. It's very complex. We're going to never figure it out, but we know at this point what the science is consistent with. Whole Foods Market is the only organization in the country I know that are controlling their medical costs. This is their percent increase in their medical costs. As you can see, going down. More recently, they're now down in negative figures. They're paying the same for health insurance for their employees in 2014 that they were in 2010, and their employees are actually paying less out of pocket. This is how much less the team members pay compared to their other counterparts at other grocery stores around the country. They did this through a biometric testing program where it's a voluntary program. They test them to see if they're a non-smoker, their blood pressure, weight, and cholesterol, and based on these results, they can go up from their 20% discount in the store up to 30%. So they're investing in their employees getting healthier, and they invest in these immersion programs I told you about. The McDougall has one, Santa Rosa, the one I work out, Esselstyn has one in Sedona, Stoll is down in Florida, and Furman is back east in New Jersey. I took a look at some of my patients for the talk I gave at Intermountain Healthcare this past week at their advanced training program, the best program for quality improvement for healthcare professionals in the world. This is a population of 35 patients, and you can see that 10 of them qualified as pre-diabetic, and 6 of them were cured at the end of the 8 days, and 25 had normal blood sugars, and 23 of those normal patients had practiced primary prevention and gotten better in 8 days. Tertiary prevention is very costly. This is how the healthcare industry today has been dealing with this. The one on the left, we check your insurance and the only thing it covers is one visit from a Care Bear. Over here, the medical profession is trying to find cheaper ways to do the procedures. Yes, stomach stapling is quite expensive. If you prefer a cheaper alternative, I could staple your mouth shut for $5. not funny, but you got to maintain a little. So here's the bottom line. Here's a Glass Burton cartoon. Lose some weight, quit smoking, move around more, and eat the carrot. So whole food plan, plant diet, fitness. You might have to take some vitamin B12 supplementation just to make sure you don't get in trouble with that. I take 2,000 once a week under my tongue when I think about it. Get it checked once a year, every 2 years, whenever I see my doctor. Non-smoking, lean body weight. You want to work with knowledgeable healthcare professional. Here's the one on the left. I can't tell you how glad I am to have finally found a doctor who doesn't harp on me about my weight. And then you got Neil Barnard over here, the physician for the Physician Committee responsible. Welcome to Sweeney's All You Can Eat Barbecue. I'm Neil Barnard. I'll be your waiter and cardiologist. You can pick which one you'd rather see. Okay. And I say knowledgeable health professionals, not just physicians. It can be nurse practitioners, PAs, registered dietitians, whoever you want to work with. I do think it's important if you are on blood pressure medicine, diabetic medicine, or psychiatric medicine that you actually work with a physician or somebody very knowledgeable about taking you off those medications before you dive in it. You want to minimize protein. Breast milk is 5% protein. That's how much protein you needed when you were growing faster than any other time in your life. There's 15% in oatmeal, 8% in potatoes, 28% in peas, 42% in... You can see you can't... It's impossible not to get enough protein if you eat adequate calories. It is impossible. As a matter of fact, the essential amino acid profiles, which is really what you need, you can make the other amino acids. The essential amino acids are the ones you can't make. It's identical in eggs, asparagus, and broccoli. The problem is the eggs are just much more complicated. They don't have fiber and the phytonutrients. So you definitely don't want to go out of your way to increase your protein. Even going after a lot of beans may not probably be good. We try and limit people to 2 cups of beans. Beans are great food, though. Beware supplements. All the studies on isolated supplements show bad results. And when you understand the complexity of the human metabolism and you start giving people isolated supplements, you're going to get results that you don't anticipate. The best supplement, it's not the beta-carotene, it's the carrot. Okay? It's the whole food. In Whole, Colin Campbell's book, he talks about 157 milligrams of vitamin C in an apple. Only 5 milligrams of actual vitamin C are in the apple. So there are things in apples and stuff that benefit us that we don't understand. It's the whole food. Beware of people that want to optimize your nutrition. There is no way you can optimize complex systems. In closing, we are not hunter-gatherers. We are hunted-gatherers. We're herbivores. We're actually hindgut fermenters, and our anatomy is consistent with gathering. If you think that's not true, go out with none of your tools or instruments or any weapons and start hunting things. You won't do well. When you go out in the real world, you got to work with others. We tend to be groups. Here's a Tundra cartoon I like. The language barrier hasn't been so much of a problem as this whole vegan thing. Here's the poor panda, who eat nothing but bamboo, right? Talking to the grizzlies up in Alaska eating salmon, which is not a health food, by the way. So, thanks for your time. I put some resources up here. All these are on my website. The cards are up here. Help yourself. We run out of cards, but you want to keep yourself informed. Here's a poor patient who went to his doctor. Diabetes has increased dramatically over the past 20 years. That proves that diabetes is caused by global warming. Go to my website, Resources for Everyone, nutritionfacts.org. Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, Dr. McDougall has much newsletters and recipes. Thanks for your time. Sorry for the sound issue.
Those videos